Alright, here's another example on the Hora. This one we're going to look at dashas a little bit more. But to start out with, we'll just see which planets are in the preferred Horas. First, right away you see most of this person's planets are in the moon's Hora, in the Hora, Hindu Hora. All except the sun. Right away that tells you this person is someone who's really strongly motivated by ancestral karmas, a very family-centered person, not the type of person that has big plans in the world so much, but just a very family-centered person whose karmas are going to mostly revolve around people that they're closely involved with. However, the one planet that is in the sun's Hora is the sun, who wants to be in the sun's Hora. So they do have a leadership quality about them, a more masculine initiative leadership quality there. Now the reason I use that word leadership in particular is simply because the sun is in the 10th bhava, the house of rulership. It's the karaka of rulership, and it rules the 11th house, which is the house of groups. And so that's a good combination for someone who does have leadership qualities. And they'll find satisfaction in that because the sun is in the sun's Hora. Okay? All the other planets are in the moon's Hora. So this is really, stacked really towards family karmas, not so much karmas and responsibilities towards the world, but responsibilities towards the family. And because of that, this person spent most of their life as a housewife taking care of their immediate family. Although they did eventually go on to having a career where they have, an authority position. But let's look at the other planets too. The moon is in the Hora of the moon where we want it to be. Mars is in the Hora of the moon where we don't want it to be. Mercury is in the Hora of the moon. In this chart, we want it in the Hora of the sun because Mercury is in an odd sign, so that's not desirable. Jupiter's in the Hora of the moon, not where we want it. Venus is in the Hora of the moon, which is great. And then Saturn's in the Hora of the moon. So there's 4 planets out of 7 that are in the great Horas. Venus, Saturn, Moon, which want to be in the moon's Hora, and Sun, which wants to be in the sun's Hora. So 4 out of 7, that's more than 50%. That's the high average of satisfaction that we can expect this person to achieve in this lifetime. So they'll be able to feel satisfied with 4/7 of their responsibilities. 8 of those are hard responsibilities, but they'll feel a lack of satisfaction in 3/7 of their responsibilities, even if what they're responsible for with those planets is a great thing. Okay? Okay, and we'll get into all that details later, but for now we just understand that, okay, more on the high average of satisfaction for this person, and a very person whose responsibilities are mostly family-centered and just a little bit centered towards the world thanks to this sun. Most important planet in the Hora chart's the moon. In this chart, the moon is in Cancer in the Hora in its own sign, so it's a good strong moon that way. In the Rashi chart, moon's in Cancer too, so it's a pretty nice moon. But what's it influenced by? First, it's with Venus, who's in neutral towards it, but then it's in the same sign of the sun, so it is a somewhat agitated moon. However, in the Hora chart, the sun is sleeping, so we can't agitate the moon or cause the moon to be worried about its responsibilities. Then it's aspected by Jupiter, his neutral, and Saturn, his neutral. So the moon just gets strength on account of being in his own sign. He has no deficits, no additives on top of that, but he doesn't need them. He's in his own sign. So this is a nice moon and shows a person who does have a great capacity towards finding satisfaction, and someone who doesn't stress or worry about their responsibilities, which is where a lot of satisfaction comes. The more we worry and the more stress we have, the less satisfied we are with what we have to do. So this person has a really amazing capacity for just fulfilling their responsibilities without a lot of worry and stress. They just aren't a worried person. Now they do have the moon with Rahu. Okay, in both the Rashi chart and of course in the Hora chart, which is common. So the moon's with Rahu, and that shows that they're learning to get in touch with their feelings about things. They're learning to see what they need in life. And so this person certainly has suffered from that, thinking what they needed for happiness was something when it turned out it wasn't that thing. So Rahu has certainly confused their needs for happiness, which is typical of Rahu. But they don't have any of the worrisome planets there, because again, Rahu, though malefic, it doesn't form in Lajitadi Avashtas. So the moon doesn't suffer agitation, and he doesn't suffer starvation, those types of things, which really make the moon uncomfortable all the time. So it's a pretty good moon, but still a moon that's finding itself due to the Rahu conjunction. Okay? Alright, second lord, how's that doing? Second lord is ruled by Venus, or the second house is Taurus in the Hora, ruled by Venus. That's the most important planet in this chart. Venus is in Cancer, its natural enemy sign, so it's sleeping. It's in the Rashi chart, it's with the sun, who would try to agitate it, but the sun can't because he's sleeping. But it's with the moon, who is malefic and enemy to Venus. So the moon is starving Venus. Okay? So Venus is starved by being in the moon sign, and then also starved by being conjunct the moon here in the Rashi. And then Venus is influenced by Jupiter, his neutral, who's not doing anything, by Saturn, his friend, just a minimum 4 points. And since Saturn's in a natural friend sign, he has a little power, but he only aspects Venus to a minimal 4 points, so it's really not going to help. So this is a starved Venus. So the second lord is starved, so they're going to feel very starved with respect to possessions and wealth, and seventh house relationships. And that's been very true for this person. Even though they've married, successful people and one well-to-do person, the lifestyles of those people made her feel very starved for second house matters, for wealth and material things, and also for, relationships. So that is a starved Venus here, unfortunately. Okay? Most of their life, they weren't really responsible for their own finances. Okay? They couldn't just go write a check out for money. They just couldn't go buy something without their husband's permission and things like that. And, in both relationships, the husband's never really understood her needs for why she might want something. So she was very starved in the sense of managing her finances, didn't get much opportunity for managing her finances, and so on. Okay? Because that Venus is not good. Now let's look at the second house too. The second house, where's the aspects to that? Let me pull that up. Second house has no planets in it. In the Rashi's chart, second house falls in Scorpio with no conjunctions. Second house is aspected by the sun to 29 points, who is, let's check the sun's dignity, who's in a neutral's dignity, so he can't help. By the moon, who's in its own sign to 9 points, so the moon is helping the second house a bit. By Mars, who's in a neutral sign, so can't help. By Mercury in a friend sign, so Mercury can help the most, to 42 points. By Venus, who's in a great enemy sign, so Venus is hurting. And by Saturn, who's in a great friend sign, so Saturn's helping. So we have more helpful influences than harmful influences onto the second house. So the person never had periods where they didn't have the materiality they needed, because the second house has, if we added up 50, 42, 92, and moon, and 9 is at 101 points of good, compared to 29, 37 points of bad. So there's a lot more good influences to that. And of course the moon is not the strongest influence aspect-wise, but at least is in its own sign. So the second house is about 3 times, 2/3 good, 1/3 bad. So it's a good second house. So they never suffered financially. Their needs were always met. Their husbands always gave them money they needed to manage their needs. But the second lord is in really bad shape. Okay? So they it's influenced by too many enemies. So they never really got to manage their money. They couldn't just go spend money and things like that. The Lord is the manager. The second house is what you have. The Lord is how you run it, because the Lord is the ruler, right? Now, Venus, fortunately, was in the moon's Hora. So at least this person has the capacity to be satisfied in love. They make the intimate personal connections romantically and in relationships to feel in love all in all. So they have that satisfaction of, due to their ability to feel close to somebody. And also that's shown because the moon is in the moon's Hora too. They really have that quality to really enjoy spending time with loved ones. But those times were not really great when the Venus is starved, so they weren't given a lot when it came to 7th house relationship and 2nd house, which is also family. In family, they lived away from their immediate family. They lived in another country. Their kids, their children, this woman's children moved to different parts of the country. One person actually moved to another country. And so there's always been a big part of her family, most of it living far away from them. And, like I said, different countries. One reason we can see that is because Cancer gets involved in the starvation process. And Cancer rules foreign places, foreign countries, and traveling to foreign countries. So first they come to a foreign country. Then one of their children goes to a foreign country. Another one spends some time in foreign countries. And the other children are living, for the most part, very far away. During sometimes one child might live within 200 miles, but really that's as close it is. It hasn't lived in the same town with any of the children, even though they have a real closeness with family, and are really a personable person due to this moon and Venus being in the moon's Hora. But it's just Venus is starved. So 2nd house family, 7th house relationships leave an element of starvation for this person. But they still are able to find satisfaction in what they have because they at least are connected that way. But they just have less to be satisfied with because Venus is starved. Okay? Next important house to look at is the 3rd house. The 3rd cusp has Jupiter in it, in the Rashi chart. But in the Hora chart, Jupiter is in a great enemy sign. So he's not really helping the 3rd house. Okay? He's actually hurting it because he's in an enemy sign in the Hora chart. Then the 2nd house, or 3rd house, is aspected by Moon, which is helping a lot. It's a strong moon in its own sign. And it's, it's in its own sign and it's making a strong aspect. Mars is in neutral, so he's not doing anything. Mercury, the Lord of the 3rd, is aspecting to 24 points and he's in a friend sign, so that's good. Venus, unfortunately, is in a great enemy sign, so hurting the 3rd. But Saturn's in a great friend sign and helping the 3rd. So overall, the 3rd house is pretty decent. It's not bad particularly, but it's not super great. It's about average. So their courage to go out there and do what they have to manage their resources is average. Their ability to work with others to fulfill their responsibilities and increase their resources is average. And that's very true for this person. They're not socially retarded when it comes to working with people to make things happen, but they aren't really great at it either. Just very average with that. Okay? They put an average amount of energy into fulfilling their responsibilities and resources. They're very average in that whole respect of how much energy they put into it, how much energy they have for it, basically. When there's challenges and difficulties with managing their resources or getting money, they deal with it with an average intensity. They're not super able. They can't pull a rabbit out of the hat, but they can definitely, get the job done in the average amount of time. So average house. Average houses are no fun to talk about. Okay, let's look at the 4th house. The 4th house has just Ketu conjuncting it in the Rashi chart. Aspect-wise, the 4th house has the aspect of the Sun, who's in a great... the sun is not as bad. He's in a natural enemy sign, so he's sleeping. But he is not in a great enemy sign. He's in a neutral's dignity. So he's not really hurting those houses we talked about, the second house. Okay? And he's not hurting the fourth house. So good, that reduces a lot of trouble there. Moon is aspecting the fourth as its lord from its own sign. So a lot of good weight from the moon. Mars is a neutral, so indifferent. Mercury is helping the 6 points. Jupiter's in a great enemy sign, so hurting the 2 points. Venus is hurting a lot, the 51 points, because it's in a great enemy sign. Saturn is helping the 13 points. So a little bit of help of Saturn. And Venus is hurting about as much as the moon is helping, both 51 points, surprisingly. And then they get a little help of Mercury and Saturn. So it's a little bit stronger than it is weaker. Okay? It's sort of average. Okay? It's not bad, it's not great. But it does have its own, its own lord strongly aspecting it. Okay? And really it's the fourth lord that makes things happen for the fourth house here. Well, the Baba is just so-so. Okay? Which means the wealth sunk into their house has just been average. They've never lived in really fantastic places. They've always lived in very humble but clean and good houses is what they were able to buy. They've never lived in anything really extravagant, really nice. But then they haven't lived in really dumps. Like, if they expect to their children, 2 of their children live in below average houses. And 2 of their children live in above average houses. So, whereas this person always kind of hits the average with the quality of real estate they're living in, that they're able to purchase and buy. Now, the moon we've already looked at is good. It doesn't have any enemies influencing it. It's in its own sign. It's a good, solid, strong planet. And so that's helped them acquire property and happiness with their, with fulfilling their responsibilities. So they have had happiness. They would definitely say they feel good about the things they've taken care of and been responsible for and their accomplishments in life. But they've definitely suffered a lot of second and seventh house lack in life. Venus is so able to connect because it's in its own Hora. Then it's so afflicted in the Hora that this is like a person who really can be satisfied in a great relationship, but they're always an element of starvation in their relationships, unfortunately, which makes it sad. When a person's got Venus in the Hora of the Sun and they really aren't going to be able to connect fully with the person anyway, and if their relationship isn't great, who cares? It's not as big of a deal because they're not going to take full advantage of a great relationship anyway. But this person really would take advantage of a great relationship, but always there's some things in the relationship that give her, that cause her to feel starved because of these afflictions, okay? Okay, let's see. Great enemies. Okay, but at least the Venus is in the moon's Hora, so they can make that human connection, okay? The other planets, we'll look at those. Saturn is nice. Saturn in this chart is actually very nice. He's in a great friend's dignity, a natural friend sign, so he's, in a decent Vashta. He's in the Hora of the moon, so he can find satisfaction. He can grow psychologically. He'll feel validated from things. And Saturn in the Hora rules the 10th and 11th Bhabakas. So what are the things he'll feel validated in? Well, in his work and with his peers. 10th house has to do with our career. So in Saturn Dasha is finally when this person started working. They never held a job until later in life in Saturn Dasha. After they raised children in Rahu Dasha and Jupiter Dasha, they finally got out late in Saturn Dasha at a late age and started working. And that was that Dasha is just coming to a close here in a year. During that Saturn period, they found satisfaction in getting their degree, 11th Bhava. They started a career. They've been very validated there. Now the interesting thing is, though, is that Saturn's ruling these very external houses in the Hora, the 10th and 11th, very much houses of doing and getting honored for what you do. But this Saturn is a Saturn that's going to find satisfaction in being validated as an individual, as a person, okay? Because that's what Saturn wants. He wants to be loved for who he is, not what he's doing. So what Saturn Dasha did, it put them into a situation, a work situation, where they're obviously taking care of their responsibilities because Saturn's in good shape. And in that situation, they meet peers, they meet people at work who like and care about them as a person and validate them as a person. So Saturn feels very satisfied with work, not because of all the great things they're doing, but because of the connections they're making with people at work. They work in a hospital as a physical therapist, so they've got a whole slew of people they work with, and then of course they have patients that they work with and care for. And so we can see in those things this person's very personable. So this would be a great person to have as your physical therapist and doing your wound care and stuff like that, because they're very personable in general. They've got Venus and the moon in the Hora of the moon. They got so many planets in the Hora of the moon. And Saturn, of course, which has to do with diseases and stuff, they're going to be very personable in helping people treat with diseases. So with that warmth that this person has, she easily gets validated for who she is and not just the fact that she's skilled at her job. So Saturn feels very satisfied, and this person has felt this to be a very satisfactory time in her life. Okay? Now before Saturn Dasha, let's go back all the way to Rahu Dasha. Okay? Rahu Dasha is when she was married and had her kids. The last kid came out the end of Rahu Dasha. Rahu is going to give the results of the moon mostly, because he's conjunct the moon in the Rashi, and he's in the sign of Cancer in the Hora. So he's mostly going to give the results of the moon. He's also going to give the results of Venus and the Sun, who he's also conjunct with in the Rashi. But the most important planet he's going to give the results is the moon, because he's in the moon's Hora, and he's conjunct the moon in the Rashi. And the moon we've seen is in this great family-centered Hora, in the moon's Hora. So this person was very family-centered in the Rahu Dasha. They really much enjoyed and felt comfortable with being with their family. They didn't feel irritated or unhappy. They felt happy just being a housewife. And you see Rahu gives results of that fourth Lord moon. So their life really, really revolved around the home. After Rahu Dasha, though, they went into Jupiter Dasha. Jupiter Dasha is, first Jupiter's sleeping in a natural enemy sign. He's in a great enemy's dignity. He's in the moon's Hora where he can't be satisfied. So in Jupiter Dasha, the person is stuck, raising children with no opportunity for career, and living a very traditional life of a housewife, but not finding satisfaction there because Jupiter doesn't find satisfaction in that. Jupiter needs to share his abundance of wealth and knowledge and ability to the world. But Jupiter in the moon's Hora didn't allow for that really. And so this period was a lot less happy and frustrating for this woman, where she was really looking for something else to do, but not having any outlet, not having any other great responsibilities to do. First, because the fact that Jupiter's sleeping is a big part of why it wasn't really good. Now Jupiter picks some help up from the moon. He picks up some help from just the moon. But then he gets smashed by Mercury too, who's his natural enemy. Venus, his other natural enemy, sleeping, so he can't hurt him. But this isn't a happy Jupiter in here. So they didn't get any responsibilities that, Jupiter couldn't give any responsibilities to feel satisfied over in any way. So they were just living the household life and just not as happy as they used to be. In Rahu Dasha, they were very happy doing that. In Rahu Dasha, they were happy being home, and they were just doing all kinds of fun things around the house and taking care of the children. They were really happy. Jupiter Dasha came along, and they just didn't have any more satisfaction in life. Then Saturn Dasha came along, And we've already seen that Saturn's good. And in the Saturn period, they start becoming very satisfied with life again. One of the other things that left a big mark of dissatisfaction for this person is that was in their relationship with their husband. The husband itself is Jupiter. The marriage is Venus. The husband is Jupiter. Okay? And we can see during Jupiter period, the husband started getting very unsatisfied because Jupiter's the husband, right? So his position, the karaka, and the thing is going to show the husband's capacity for satisfaction in general. Well, the husband wasn't satisfied, and that really came about in Jupiter Dasha. And because the husband wasn't satisfied, life was a lot less satisfactory for this woman. During this period, the husband's career started having all kinds of problems. They weren't able to achieve their world's ambitions. The karmas they wanted to give to the world got frustrated and stunted. Why? Because Jupiter's in the Hora of the moon, and because Jupiter's in bad shape. And if we read the Hora from the 7th cusp, which is the husband, we see that Jupiter rules the 3rd and 6th house, competition and enemies. Well, during that time, the person started getting so much enemies at work that he was blacklisted and not able to work anywhere in the United States in his chosen field, and had to, travel abroad to work in his field. So, very unsatisfied time. During Jupiter Dasha, she divorced that husband, got a new husband. Ironically enough, that new husband had all kinds of big plans to change the world. None of them happened. He was extremely unsatisfied and extremely depressed during the entirety of their marriage. And so the woman was again with a husband, with a Jupiter person in her life, who was very unsatisfied. This husband was having opposition and enemies, subverting his plans, actually. See the 6th house from the 7th? So Jupiter's the husband. So the husband was really unsatisfied during that time. And also that made her life less satisfactory. And she herself couldn't get her Jupiter orientated towards giving anything to the world to feel satisfied in, because Jupiter was directed towards familial karmas, where it's not really happy. So that was a depressing time for the person. So this person, when Saturn Dasha came along, they're actually a lot happier. I mean, Saturn Dasha, it's been a very happy period for them, as we've talked about. Now they're going into Mercury Dasha shortly. Saturn Dasha has been very satisfactory. How will Mercury Dasha be? Well, Mercury is in the Hora of the moon, but he wants to be in the Hora of the sun because he's in a male sign here. Okay, but he's in the Hora of the moon, unfortunately. Okay? Mercury has to do with, our friends, and we can have personal friendships or impersonal friendships. Okay? Personal friendships happen when Mercury's in the Hora of the moon, and it's in a female sign in the Rashi chart. That's where Mercury has the gentleness to really, and the time and the patience to really have really nice personal relationships. Okay? Now, when Mercury's in the Hora of the sun, then his friendships become impersonal. Then he becomes a friend of all. And if he's in a male sign, then the life will give him the avenue to be friends to people as they come across them. Okay? Now this person doesn't have that, though. They've got Mercury in a male sign. So this is a busy Mercury that's not going to have the gentleness and the tolerance for just hanging around in casual intimacy with a friend. They want to feel like they're doing something with the friend, or doing something for them, or being of service somehow, being a friend of all in an impersonal way. But Mercury is not geared towards that because he's in the Hora of the moon. So when that happens, when Mercury's in the Hora of the moon, but in a male sign, a person will inadvertently step on the toes of some of their friends. They'll treat their friends cruelly or indifferently with not enough sensitivity, let's say, and their personal friends will usually have their feelings hurt, and it can harm friendships. Okay? And So Mercury's sitting for, it's showing it won't really be satisfied in friendships during this period. Now Mercury also rules the 3rd and 6th house though, okay, which has to do with competition, 3rd house and 6th house enemies. So their Mercury period can bring dissatisfaction with friends due to one of them or more, really starting to have bigger problems with them, having enmity with their friends. How big is that possibility? Well, let's see how the fate of Mercury looks. Okay? Mercury is not conjunct any planet. He's aspected by his enemy Moon to 7 points, by his neutral Mars, his neutral Jupiter, and his neutral Venus. Okay? Or his friend Venus, who's unfortunately sleeping and can't help. Then Mercury himself is in a naturally neutral sign. So Mercury is starved a little bit by the Moon. Okay, he's starved a little bit by the Moon, his only natural enemy. So this shows that in Mercury period, when it comes on, what they need to do for themselves, which is the Moon, is going to interfere with an important friendship in their life, and that will cause a lack of satisfaction with their best friend, most likely, because it's Mercury Mahadasha. So they're going to have a falling out with their best friends due to the needs of the friend and their need changing or shifting. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this one, though, is that Mercury also happens to rule Jupiter, the Karaka of the husband. So the question we have to look for is that friend that they may have some difficulties with, possibly the husband, because it's ruling Jupiter, the husband, and it rules friends naturally. And in this person's relationship, the biggest part of that relationship is friendship. It revolves around friendship. It doesn't revolve around having big goals. It doesn't revolve around having children. They don't have kids together. It doesn't revolve around anything except just the enjoyment of friendships, of doing things together. And that's what they do. They go travel together. They just do friendly things together. That's what it revolves around. And so this is a danger signal that shows us we really need it does show us there'll be some dissatisfaction with the husband again, because Mercury rules it and Mercury's not real satisfied. And that there'll be dissatisfaction with friendships. And this is because of what their growing needs are, which is the Moon. Okay? And this is an auspicious Moon. This just shows they have growing needs that may outgrow the friendship and may outgrow the friendship of their husband. So this would be a pointer to us that we need to look at the marriage chart and the Saptamsha chart, the partnership chart. So the Saptamsha for partnership and the Navamsha for marriage, and see what Mercury's doing there, to see if Mercury really is going to cause trouble in their marriage life. We know it's going to cause some element of less satisfaction that has been there in Saturn period. But just how bad will that be? Okay, we'd have to look at those other Vargas. And we'll peek at those we'll look at those Vargas again when we get to them. Okay? So, to see how satisfied the person is with their responsibilities, and again, responsibilities are a huge part of our life. If we can find happiness with what we have to do, we're going to find a lot more happiness in general in life. You look at the Dasha Lord in the Hora chart and just see how it's doing. Look at the Antardasha Lord too, if you want to see it broken down to smaller portions. Okay? Now in this chart, the most satisfactory planet, well, Sun is in its own Hora, Moon is in its own Hora, in the right Hora, Venus is in the right Hora, and Saturn's in the right Hora. Those 4 planets are in the right Hora. Which of those is the strongest? It's the Moon, right? So the most satisfactory planet for this person is the Moon. So this person, can find satisfaction simply in having a home, 4th house, where they can be happy and be themselves in. And that's very true for this person. They have that really nice simplicity to them. And they find a lot of their satisfaction in those things. Okay? Saturn, we've seen, is also a good planet, so there's a lot of satisfaction in respect to their career and their appears, and so Saturn Dasha has been great. But now Mercury Dasha is gonna be a little less satisfactory for their career. Why? Because Mercury rules Saturn in the Hora, and Mercury we've seen is not a great planet. So their needs are going to change too. And what are their needs going to be? To change towards? Well, the conflict is that the needs of the moon, which is those family-centered needs, are going to sort of conflict with the needs of her husband and her need of work, both of which Mercury rules, and the needs of the friends, which Mercury rules too. So, unfortunately, it's looking like a less satisfying period to come than they had based on the Hora chart. Okay, but that's life, up and down. They're very fortunate to have a really good Saturn Dasha, because an unhappy Saturn Dasha, an unsatisfactory Saturn Dasha in the Hora can be a Dasha where a person just feels like they have so many burdens that they have to somehow get through. So having a nice Saturn in the Hora is really great, because the responsibilities we have then don't feel like burdens. They feel like desirable things to do that make the person feel satisfied. Okay, like in the Saturn Dasha, this person really enjoys going to work. They don't want to even think about quitting their job. Their kids are like, you don't have to work that long, Mom. You started work late. You can quit, at a normal time. We can help you financially. And she's like, nope, I want to go to work, because of this Saturn Dasha. Has really felt a lot of satisfaction in working and having a job. Even though they don't really have to, they can get out of it if they wanted to. But there's going to be less satisfaction when Mercury Dasha comes. Okay? Alright, some other things to look at. I always like to look at the Yavana Jaktika forms of the Horas whenever I look at that Hora chart. So this person has the second Hora of Libra rising. So what's the form of the second Hora of Libra? The second Hora in Libra is one who is accustomed to pitiless and manly deeds. He has prominent teeth. Hating the accomplishment of protection, he carries bright-colored arrows, a knife, and a drawn sword with which to assail his enemies. He is a smasher of houses who strikes others with his fist. His hair is erect, and he is wearing a woolen cover. Crying aloud in the marketplace, he jingles the bell and causes fright among the people. So this sounds like a real troublemaker. He is accustomed to pitiless and manly deeds. Okay? This person very much can put up with that stuff. Now, one of the things about this person, they're female. Their Hora is the Hora of the moon, which is good. And they have a strong moon in their chart. Whereas the Lagna Lord Venus is sleeping and starred by the moon and agitated by the sun. It's a very weak Lagna Lord. In the Hora chart, Mars is the Lagna Lord. Mars is in a natural friend sign, which is good, aspected by sleeping friend Mars, and aspected by neutral Saturn. So Mars is relatively strong, but really the strongest planet is still that moon. In both charts, so they've got a really nice moon. Though it's better in the Rashi chart, because the Hora chart, because in the Hora chart it's not agitated by the sun like it is in the Rashi. Because the sun in the Hora is sleeping and can't agitate him, whereas in the Rashi the moon is in a natural friend sign, so he can agitate the moon somewhat. But because the moon's strong, a lot of these qualities get toned down a little bit, because these are very masculine qualities. Okay? However, so this person is accustomed to pitiless and manly deeds. This person can put up with a lot of stuff as a natural fact of life. Okay? Hating the accomplishment of protection, he carries bright-colored arrows, a knife, and a drawn sword. So this person is totally capable of taking care of themselves. And that's very true of this person. This person has really been able to take care of themselves, even when being in relationships where a lot of women would have really been nagging their husbands and stuff. This person was really able to take care of themselves and never was a nag, even though they had millions of reasons to do that. Why? Because this person doesn't want to be babied to begin with, because they hate the accomplishment of protection. Okay? He's a smasher of houses who strikes others with his fist. Okay, well this is interesting because a smasher of others. When this person divorced, that literally happened. They became a smasher of houses. When they were divorced from their long 17-year marriage with the husband that they had all their children with, two things happened. One thing is, the husband was planning on buying some real estate. And he was in another country at the time and trying to save up, or had the money and wanted to buy this great property he found. And she was supposed to be working the real estate deal for him. And she was pretending like she was for months, but because she was planning on getting divorced, she didn't want him to spend the $120,000, which he had in cash, to get the property. Okay? Because she didn't want to deal, she wanted him out of her life and didn't want them buying property. But she went along while she was arranging everything for the divorce. And so that property got sold to someone else, and then he found out about it. He was really upset. Well, when a few years later, the town that they lived in became one of the biggest boom towns in America, where real estate in like a 3-year period went up triple. So if they bought that property, and after that, real estate went up like 6 times. That property went up to $1 million in 10 years, basically. So that would have been a huge investment. That would have really benefited the whole family. Then the other thing is, the house that they had bought together, that he'd bought for her and the kids to live in while he was abroad, she wanted out of that town, so she sold the house as quick as she could for less than they bought it. And this was in a real estate market that was just on the verge of booming. 3 years later, that house was worth 3 times what she sold it for. And within 10 years, it was worth 5 or 6 times worth more than she sold it for. So a smasher of houses, inadvertently she did things not on purpose, but she didn't know where she sort of destroyed 2 of the properties in the family, both of which could have made this family and her very wealthy. Okay, so this literally happened here. Crying aloud in the marketplace, he jingles a bell and causes fright among the people. Well, that sounds like kind of person who is really willing to tell the truth about the negative things in life. And that's very true about this person. They're just practical. They don't try to sugarcoat things. They really are into the facts. If the world's going to end and they know it, they've got no problem with telling people about it. To them, it's just a natural thing. So while they themselves don't really feel that fright, the way they are about things could be frightful to other people, like the way they are about death and things like that, which they just take as a matter of course, can be very fearful to people. So things that they might talk about that could be considered tragic to other people, to them just seem like a normal thing, because they're accustomed to pitiless and manly deeds. They know that life is hard, and that's very much a quality of this person. So some of these qualities come into play, not as much as we would see if Venus was really strong. If the Lagna Lord and the Hora Lord, Lagna Lord, are really strong, the image of the Hora will be much more powerful in their personality. Okay? Looking at their face, do they have an attractive face or not? The Lagna Lord of the Hora is Mars. Mars is in Gemini in the Hora chart, or in the Rashi chart, sorry. And it's not influenced by any planets, benefics or malefics as far as conjunctions. It's Rashi aspected by Saturn, it has a strong aspect by Saturn and a strong aspect by Jupiter. If we look at Mars here, Jupiter's 59, Saturn's 33. So those are the 2 influencing planets. Jupiter's twice as much as Saturn. So the person does have a more than averagely attractive face, okay, thanks to Jupiter. So they have an attractive face, most people would say, okay? Not without its imperfections, because Saturn's aspecting it too. But all in all, Jupiter's twice of a strong influence, and Jupiter's in its own sign, so it's good. Okay, I always like to just look at the appearance because it just gives us a clue about their face, and it works out. It works really surprisingly good. Okay, so that's enough on this chart. I mostly wanted to show those dashas, how they could influence our satisfaction and happiness during the period just by looking at this Hora chart. And if we're running an afflicted dasha in the Hora that's in the wrong, Hora, the Hora Lord is wrong, it's the sun when it should be the moon or whatever, and if it's a planet that's in a bad Lajitadiya Vashta in the Hora, well, then the person's just not going to have the happiness of being satisfied with their responsibility, which is a big part of our happiness. But beyond that, there's all kinds of other reasons we can find happiness. So if that's the case, we need to look for the other things that are making that person's life worthwhile by studying the other Varga charts. Okay? And of course, if we see those things reflected twice, then we got to worry. Like in this person's chart, Mercury rules Jupiter, the ninth lord, in the Hora, and the husband. Well, we need to go to Navamsha then, right? Oops, I'll put it up here actually. What's Mercury doing in the Navamsha? In Navamsha, Mercury's in a natural friend sign, which is good. Okay? Mercury doesn't rule any bhavas there, but it rules Jupiter, the husband. It's in the sixth from the ascendant in the Navamsha, showing some stress and difficulties. It's aspected by its moon, who's in a friend sign, by Venus, its friend, who's sleeping. So Mercury doesn't get a lot of help here because he's sleeping. He is in the sixth house, and he's aspected by a moon, which is stronger. So Mercury's starved in the Navamsha, and so it's definitely pointing towards some things with the husband not being as good as they have been in Saturn period, unfortunately. Okay? So we expect to see some problems creeping into their marriage based on that analysis too. Okay? So, it's marriage, unfortunately, is not going to escape that lack of satisfaction. But in other Vargas, we find something enjoyable to tell them that you could look for. Anyway, that's it for now, and I'm sure everyone here will be looking at their Dasha Lords to see your satisfaction level that you've experienced. And that'll be a good practice. Thank you. Bye-bye.